Welcome to the Compassionate Leaders Circle podcast. For thousands of years, the sages have known that compassion is a powerful force for good. In the last 2 decades, compassion scholars caught up with these sages, proving that there is an ROI to building loving communities and businesses. This podcast features leaders who can teach us about the power of compassion. It's my honor to welcome Father Joseph McShane, the president of Fordham University, and my dear friend and colleague, Daryl Brown, shining a light on compassionate leadership. And I'm going to turn this over to my dear friend, Daryl, to talk to his colleague and friend, Father McShane.
Thank you, Laurel.
Thank you, Laurel. And what a year. And I am honored to be in a position to talk to you. Fordham runs through my veins and has for all of my life. I would not be where I am today. I would not have the life I have today without Fordham University and what it's given me in terms of who I am.
By the same token, Daryl, Fordham wouldn't be what it is without your wise counsel. I mean, I don't know if those who are watching know this, but you were on the board for a good long time, and now you're coming back to the board. And at the board table, you were a wise counselor, not afraid to raise tough questions, which of course is an important role that a board member plays. You know, raise the tough, important core questions, and you always did that. So, you know, our friendship means a lot to me, and your wisdom on the board, I would say they go neck and neck. Which do I value more? You know, the wisdom of your counsel, or you know, the depth of your heart? I don't know. It's back and forth for me.
Well, and that's the test. And what a true friendship is based on. So, yeah. Right. So why I really wanted to end this year with you, Father, is, you know, this has been a tumultuous year in a lot of different ways. Of course, the virus has really taken so many lives, and how its impact on our society has been great. But there was also the summer of George Floyd, and my life has been about social justice. Mm-hmm. You know, I was thinking just the other day that, you know, in your senior high school yearbooks, they have a quote.
Yeah.
And I was reminded the other day that my quote was about Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream.
Wow.
It was an excerpt from that. I didn't remember that, right? But one of my friends reminded me of that. Yeah. So this has been a constant theme for me my entire life. And it really interested me and taught me a lot about what I've learned at Fordham, to witness what you've done in changing the culture there. Now, changing the culture at an academic institution is, whoa, let's talk about taking one bite of the elephant, just a little nibble at a time. But I've always admired for the last 5 years when some Fordham alums, well, you know what? I'm going to quiet down. I want you to tell the story. It was about 5 years ago.
It was about 5 years ago that I asked to get together with a number of our Black graduates, all of whom were men, who they had identified themselves as a particular group, and they, as you know, Daryl, you're one of them, mm-hmm. They took great pride in referring to themselves always as the Fordham Gents. And, you know, Fordham has always had a special mission, going all the way back to our founding. As you know, Daryl, we were founded by a very pugnacious bishop who was very annoyed with the fact that people that he served were treated as outsiders, not worthy of the American dream, not worthy of being at the table of American power in any setting, whether it be political or corporate or educational. So we were founded, you know, to keep an eye out for the people who were on the margins, the people that much of society wouldn't give a hoot about. And, you know, here we are in the city of New York. One of our campuses is in Manhattan, in one of the 10 wealthiest zip codes in the country. The other is in the Bronx, and as you know, it's located in the poorest congressional district in the country. And I looked around, and I have to say the campus community looked around and said, we have to do something. We have to do something to make sure that we are true to ourselves as an institution, true to our founding ideals, and true to the promise of service. So I reached out to, there was a meeting of minds and hearts. Daryl and I talked about this. I think, Daryl, you were the driving force in setting up the meeting. And so I sat down with this remarkable group, constellation even, of Black graduates. And I remember saying, and this is very unusual, and Daryl knows this, very unusual for a Jesuit to say, I said, I have little to say. And there were, heads that just almost jumped off their necks because they threw them, what? They were so taken aback. But I said, no, really, I'm here as a student. I have to listen. I have to learn. I have to try to wrap myself around what an experience is that I have no inside, understanding of. And I want you just to let me listen. And they did. They were very, all the men around the table, and it was all men at the time, as you recall, Daryl. They were very patient with me, and they walked me through. They told me first their stories because, in an age like ours, which is obsessed with news and data and so on, we can forget that the real story is the personal story. And so each one began with the story of his life. And, because there was the Fordham presence in their lives, they would, wrap their stories around Fordham or Fordham around their life stories and tell me what the experience meant for them. But they also were very clear about, seeing their lives in episodic terms, what Fordham was like for them as people that felt themselves outsiders. And then what the experience of the education that they got here enabled them to achieve. So, they had this very clear sense, it was tough being a Black man at Fordham when they were in college. They were deeply grateful for the education, and they valued, they cherished, and treasured the relationships that they built. And I listened intently. And as each life unfolded before me, and that's what it really was. It wasn't a set of data. It wasn't a dull treatise in a newspaper or in an academic study. But as each life unfolded, I began to understand. I didn't begin to understand the experience, Daryl. I began to understand how much I had to learn.
So I think we ought to also say that what precipitated this meeting were two things. One was a gathering of us just the guys getting together and saying, now that we've gone through our careers and we're at the tail end of all of our careers, what can we do to give back? Yeah. And one of the places where we wanted to give back was at Fordham University. And at Fordham, there were some issues. There were some events at the time that we felt needed attention, because the racial unrest, let's not call it racial unrest, just the racial incidents that happened on campus, we felt like, heck, this could have happened during the 70s.
Yeah.
So how far have we come, and how are we going to change things? Let us, and could we be a sounding board for you?
And, you're absolutely correct. It was, the goodness of your hearts that brought you back, but it was precipitated by, a series of really raw experiences that the university community had. And you used the word sounding board, the term sounding board. You wanted to come back and be a sounding board for me, which is what you expected to be when you came in. I don't think that you realized you signed on to lecturers and mentors, which is really what happened pretty fast, pretty quickly. So the stories of lives and the stories of the way in which those lives unfolded, it was an extraordinary learning moment for me. And the other thing that was extraordinary about it was, you weren't all the same age. A number of you were around the same time, but you were not all the same age.
No.
And since then, the Gents has become a broader group. But what struck me was the genuine affection that each person in the group had for everybody else in the group. And that kind of settled me, more. And so I wanted to listen. In some ways, in the earliest parts of the conversation, the back and forth between, or the kibitzing between the members of the Gents was as interesting to me as the individual stories, because it spoke of a network that had been formed, a network that was strong. And I have to say, the strength was shown in a number of ways: strength of mind, the strength of heart, and the strength of character. So this was an impressive moment for me. And I just, I couldn't get enough. I wanted to be a sponge and just take it all in. And occasionally someone would say, do you have a question? You recall, and I would, say, yes, let me throw out a question. And, but mostly it was me listening, observing, learning. And from that initial meeting, Daryl, you recall, the decision was made that, we would take action,
Mm-hmm.
but informed action. So it wouldn't be something that, the campus community or the administration, as well-meaning and well-intentioned as we might have been, it wasn't just what we would dream up, but rather it would be informed by the experiential wisdom of yourself, the other gents, and as the conversation went forward, the group expanded. And as you know, now we're really blessed to have on the board a number of very strong Black leaders who have continued. And frankly, Daryl, it was from that moment that our commitment to diversifying the board was born.
Father, the board of trustees, what it looks like today versus
Right, yeah.
when I first came on is absolutely astounding. And it really is. You were intentional about your actions, which is what leadership takes. Right? You can be aware of something and then you could want to act on something, but to be intentional about those actions is really critical.
Right. And one after the other, we were able to recruit and seat at the board a number of outstanding Black graduates. They did not sit there as ornaments. There are a lot of places or corporations where, a Black person is recruited to be, in a certain sense, a badge or an ornament. And on the board, that was not going to be the way. It couldn't be the way because we had work to do. I'm going to go back to your observation at the beginning. We had work to do. And the work that we had to do was mission important, mission centric, really. If we were going to be true to our mission, we had to listen to women and men who could tell us a story and move us off the dime. And so we began the work. And, it's been, as you know, Daryl, it's now 5 years, going into 6, where we've been about this work. And at every step, it's, let's have the conversation. Let's see if we can, reduce to written form what we've learned, and then check to see if we got it right, and then begin to see what actions would grow out of those discoveries that have been made. And, some of the discoveries, Darren, you and I have had conversations about this. Some of the discoveries we made were not happy discoveries, were they?
No.
They're not things that we would pat ourselves on the back about,
But if they were, we wouldn't have needed to be formed, and it wouldn't have been brought to our attention.
Right, perhaps. But how the question really is, how had it been? Why was it so long? Before we got to this moment. So we dug in, we looked at practices, and
Father, let's answer that question. Why do you think it had taken so long to get to the moves that you made?
Well, I don't know. I know my predecessors were very strongly directed towards social justice and racial justice. And let's tease that out of social justice. Racial justice is a very important thing. And both you and Doc Carter, and as well Valerie Rainford, have pointed out to me that at some points in conversations, people feel more comfortable talking about social justice than they do talking about race. And that's let me be the guy to put that on the table, because that's an important thing. It's one thing to talk from a safe distance, about social justice. You can. It's a wonderful term, but it's too much of an umbrella, and under that umbrella there is this very important and painful reality of American life, and that is racism. So racial justice, we had to really look at that. And I know that my predecessors, Father O'Hare and Father Finley, were very, very concerned about this. I think part of it is, I would say the lateness of the opening of this particular conversation was due to the fact that, up until fairly recently, into the 70s, for Catholics who were, Italian, Poles, Germans, Irish, Puerto Ricans, they were kind of central to our identity, but we did not take seriously the fact that we didn't have eyes or hearts that were wide enough or open enough to see that we were doing okay with certain groups, but we had forgotten. or how could we not see what was in front of us? I think it was more not blindness, but more being much more focused on another set of people. You know, when you were here, Father Joe Fitzpatrick was still alive. You know, he was in the sociology department. And he did for Fordham something that was extraordinarily important, and that is he opened Fordham's eyes to the existence of the most vibrant Puerto Rican community in the world outside of Puerto Rico. And, you know, he called the university to a new engagement with Puerto Rican diaspora. And he became the guy who really redefined what diaspora studies was, not at Fordham, but for the whole world of sociology. So he had our eyes trained on that. And you'll recall, and the other thing, Daryl, I think this plays into it as well. Most of the schools upon which we relied for students were schools that would be sending us, if they were from the boroughs, they'd be sending us mostly poor Puerto Rican students, that is, say, Puerto Rican students who were very talented but came from families of modest means, Italians who were, you know, still coming as immigrants, and then you get the Irish and the Poles and the Germans and maybe some French Canadians that got in without anybody noticing because. But those schools, the feeder network, really kind of programmed us. And we become, I think all institutions become comfortable with their feeder schools. And so, so we did not have much. Now, what began to happen, and this is, you know, this brings us all the way up to the moment. What began to happen is that Catholic schools, and they were major feeder schools for us, their clientele changed dramatically. You know, think of New York. Now, you were suburban New York when you were growing up, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, but think of Rice, think of Power, think of All Hallows, think of Hayes, think of Christ the King, think of Nazareth. Their student bodies changed dramatically in a fairly short period of time. And so we began more and more, because they were our feeder schools, to have young women and men from the Black community who are coming to us. And one of the early discoveries, Daryl, was that, and this is an important thing for me always to reflect on, the Black community is an extraordinarily diverse community. You know, here at Fordham, we have American Black students. We have Caribbean Black students. We have African students. And, you know, they have enriched the life of Fordham. And I'm going to go to one of the things that, you know, we talk about with regularity. It's only when you get to know individuals that you begin to appreciate the fact that not everyone is the same, so that not every Black student has the same history. A Caribbean American student is going to be different from someone whose family has been in New York for generations. And both of those are going to be radically different from the very large, we have a very large, I don't know if you know this, Ghanaian community just down the road from us here at Rose Hill. So it was the change, going back to your original question, why did it take so long? I think it took long because we were so reliant on comfortable relationships with feeder schools, and the feeder schools sent us the same kind of kid for a long, long time, and then they changed. You know, I would say in the last 2 decades that, you know, we've seen much, much more diversity. There's an irony here, isn't there, Daryl? We're in the most diverse city in the country, if not the world, and yet we were blind and I would say unresponsive to a community that was important to us. Okay. So let me stop there and shoot a question or two or 10 at me, because that's the way we're going to make progress.
So I like the word unresponsive because I think that's American society as a whole, right? It's unresponsive, but unresponsive for a multitude of reasons. And a lot of it, you and I have talked about, and we've talked about it in board meetings, is the lack of awareness of kind of just the air we breathe. You know, we breathe an air of, we've all grown up in an air of whiteness. And if you look around campus, I don't know, what would you say the racial breakdown is?
Well, you know this as well as I. On the undergraduate level, we're about 4% Black. we have many more Hispanic students than we have Black students. Then we have, Asian Pacific students in about the same numbers, maybe slightly higher than we do with Hispanic communities. In the graduate and professional schools, it's radically different. Their student bodies in education and in social service are heavily either Hispanic or Black. But the law school it's moving up in the percentage of Black students. On the undergraduate level, 4%, and that's really a shame.
Well, what is the percentage? What is the white percentage? More like.
Oh, now if you put all the groups that, all the communities, I don't want to say groups, that's a terrible thing to say. All the communities I just referred to, they would account for about, in every entering class, about 35 to 36%. And the rest would be white or identifying as two races.
Right.
And that's becoming more the case these days.
So the question, going back, is how do you impact that culture, so it's still a white dominant culture that these other 35% of people of color come into. So there's the juggling act. That's why I'm so impressed by what you've done up to this point, Father, that you've recognized that and are willing to make the changes that are necessary in terms of faculty, in terms of, I don't want to tell your story because I think you've done a wonderful job over the last 5 years.
Darryl, you give me too much credit. One of the things that is really, really great about Fordham right now is that the receiving culture is a culture of openness and commitment. So our faculty and deans see this as they don't see it as a challenge, they don't see it as a problem. They see it as a mission important set of actions that we have to take. So it's easy now, we've had real success. I'm sending out a letter tomorrow about what we've been able to do in the last semester. And let me be honest on this, it's a beginning, and I've said this over and over again, it's a beginning, but you and Doc Carter and Valerie Rainford tell me it's a beginning, but it's a good beginning. You don't have to be perfect, you just have to do it.
Right.
So, we've had really good success in the last few years in diversifying the ranks of the faculty and the staff. And that in the marketplace is hard to do, but we've put our backs into it. And by the way, I didn't have the chance to tell you, I don't think, but at the board meeting last week, we created the first endowed chair in African and African American studies, which is a very important moment in the history of the university. We don't have a chair like that. We have a couple of chairs named for iconic Black people, like Sister Thea Bowman, but this is the first one created by a bequest given to us by a woman who was PhD, and she was from Ghana originally. So it's the Peel Chair, the Margaret Peel Chair, Distinguished Chair in African and African American Studies. So we've done well on that. One of the things that I learned from you, from Doc, from Valerie, from Greg Chisholm and Andy Hinton, is that set goals. If you don't meet them, don't kill yourself, but set goals. So what goals do we have to really work on the diversification of the faculty? What is it going to mean? And I want to go off on a little bit of a tangent on this one, but it's a tangent related to the work that you've been doing and the other gents have been doing on recruitment for us. You'll recall, I think, that Fordham for 12 years has hosted the only open access college fair for Black and Hispanic students in the state of New York. Imagine that. In the whole state, there's one college fair that seeks to demystify the college search process for Black and Hispanic students, for students who come from neighborhoods where college has not been a feature in life. They come from families that have great desires and dreams, but they don't have the experience, and so they're lost. So we have this great fair. We get 1,000 kids a year who come to it, and we bring in 65 private colleges, and they sell their wares. That is, say they try to attract people, and we do the same. At one of the sessions at one of the fairs, I want to say it was 3 years ago, and I want to say that Doc Carter was standing there with his mouth agape when I was in a conversation with this one kid from the Bronx, and I said to him, "Well, my friend, I hope when the time comes, you throw your lot in with Fordham and come here." And this kid, with all the truthfulness that innocence can give you, looked at me and he said, to be honest, I can't even see myself here. And I said, I beg your pardon? And he repeated it. He said, Father, in all honesty, I can't see myself here. And it dawned on me, and Doc was standing there, mouth open. And, we had a conversation. I've had conversations since then about this. What the kid was saying is, I don't see my own people here in the front of the classroom. And I don't see enough Black faces in the student body for me to feel completely at home. I don't see this was one of these moments, Daryl, where I said to myself, oh my God, this is unbelievable to me. Because when you throw out that line, normally I can't see myself here, it's a throwaway line. For this kid, it was a literal statement. Yeah. And it was one of those things that, it really hammered home to me that we have to be serious about. Focused, purposeful, mission-driven recruiting. And then we have to put that on a diet that makes it more powerful. I was going to say steroids, but that's a bad word to use these days. But we have to do recruiting that is focused and purposeful. And to use one of your favorite words, intentional.
Right. So in being intentional, when that kid said that, I don't see myself here, he was also talking about the overall environment. The environment has to be inviting. And sometimes it's not just Black faces or persons of color faces. Sometimes it's social events. Sometimes it's obviously administrators and faculty. So the total environment has to be looked at and has to be welcoming to people of color.
Yes. And therefore, I'm going to start with the faces because, and we've had this conversation a lot, Daryl. You and I both laughed ruefully about, people who say, I don't see color. And my response is, I've got a great optometrist for you because, you have to see the color. And this kid was telling me that that's important. So, but important in the front of the classroom and in the admissions office and in positions, because it's one thing, and this to say to a kid, come here and your life is going to be great. You're going to have great achievement. You're going to have great success, and your life is going to be filled with meaning. And then they look around and they say, well, that's what they think. That's what they're trying to sell. I don't see it. I don't see a Black man or a Black woman in the front of this classroom charged with the great responsibility, the awesome responsibility of teaching young minds and shaping young lives. So it's one of the challenges, and this, you've been on the board and you've heard these conversations, is we have to do simultaneously a number of things. You have to recruit for diversity in the ranks. You have to recruit for diversity among the student body. And you have to, once you get people on campus, you have to make sure, and you've made this point very strong a few minutes ago, you have to have a receiving culture, which is welcoming and affirming. That's a real challenge right now. We're not alone, being below 6%. 6% seems to be, a barrier moment for a lot of colleges and universities in recruiting Black students, especially Black men. But except for historically Black colleges and universities and some publics, they're okay. But it's hard all around. So you have to do it simultaneously. Number one. Number two, the other thing is this is an interesting thing. Again, the Jensen, and in a special way, Daryl will whisper in my ear, don't be discouraged. Don't be discouraged. You just have to keep at it. And I at one point said, you may recall, I sent out a letter in the middle of the summer after George Floyd's tragic and brutal killing. And I got some really wonderful letters, and then I got some nasties, not from Fordham people, but it was out there. So I got these nasties, and I said to Daryl to Doc when he asked me, he said, "So how did it go?" And I said, "I made some enemies." He said, "They're good enemies to make." Just like that, the way he can do that. They're good enemies to make.
Yes.
But it is. I have to say, Daryl, I have a great sense of being. I have companions in mission, we call them among the Jesuits. Right. people with whom we break bread and who are committed to this, with whom we can talk. And I said this to you recently. I said, I've never lost the sense that I'm still a student here. I'm not a student at Ford, I'm a student in this work. And so I have to listen, to be honest enough and humble enough to turn to people and say, speak to me. You know, people say to me, what's the formula for being a good leader? I said, I don't know. I look at good leaders and I say, it seems to me the following is clear. A good leader is somebody who's humble enough to ask for advice and wise enough to take it, or wise enough to seek advice and humble enough to take it. Either way that you throw it or that you cast it works. And that means you have to be committed to kind of the ongoing conversation. And Darren, you and I talk a lot about encounter. You know, until you encounter a Black person as a real person, you're going to be locked into, you know, inherited ways of thinking and seeing and acting. I think the encounter, and especially the encounter of friendship and of learning, those two encounters are key, you know, to keeping us going, you know, in this work.
So something you've said to me recently, Father, that I'd love to hear you expound upon, is that racism is a moral issue.
Mm-hmm. It is. You know, yeah, look at the way I'm dressed. I would have to see it in that light. I think if I didn't, I'd be a terrible candidate to wear this. You know, in American society, there's, as you know, and we've talked a lot in the last 5 years and a lot in the last 9 months. In American society now, it's, you know, it's politicized. You know, let me tell you this: the politics of race, that's there.
Yeah.
That's a given, eh? And then there's a racism that's based on, you know, sociological difference, you know, and also economic difference. And of course, the socioeconomic and the racial go together. And people say, well, we're going to solve this politically. Well, 401 years ago, or 401 years ago, the first enslaved Black people were not brought, were transported to this section of North America that became the United States. Now, the Emancipation Proclamation was 1863. And, you know, the 13th and 14th Amendments are right in that era. Then you have the remarkable moment during LBJ's presidency. LBJ, you know, a guy from Texas, gets both the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act through. Now, I'm not really great with mathematics, but politics didn't solve the problem. Laws didn't solve the problem. And people will say, well, it's economic. It is economic, but the economics is really rooted in racism. One of the aha moments I've had in the last 2 months, in 3 different sessions, it was pointed out to me that, and you probably know this, Daryl, because you're on top of this stuff, I'm a late bloomer in this. The average wealth of a Black family is 1/10 of the average wealth of a white family. 170,000 for a white family, 17,000 for a Black family. And that has generational importance because it makes the goal of a college degree much more difficult for a Black family because they don't have the home equity. And that, of course, is part of the absence of wealth. And it kind of feeds upon itself, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
So, you know, you have race, politics hasn't solved it for us. People are locked in. There's a guy who was the president of the world's largest public relations firm who wrote a book called, get it, it's a good afternoon's read called Capitalists Arise. And in this book, he says that we're at a moment where we probably are going to see, we could see the creation of zip code-based caste systems from which it will be impossible for people to escape. And so why would we put up with castes? For goodness sake, why do we put, it's a moral issue because people are unable to see the other as the same as themselves, therefore equal to them, therefore worthy of respect, reverence, and affection. It's a moral thing. And, you know, for those of us, and I think America, you know, the soul of America is a religious soul. And there's where, you know, there's both hope and there's frustration, isn't there? That with this religious soul, we haven't been able to do it. But because we have religious soul as a country, if we saw it and spoke of it as this is a moral issue, I don't care if you're reading the Bible, New Testament or Old, or the Quran, or any of the books of the Eastern traditions, and take them seriously. You can't accept racism. You just can't, because it's based upon a refusal to see the other person, as made in the image and likeness of God, made out of God's love, and therefore equal to you and worthy of reverence, respect, and affection. I take those three very seriously. Mm-hmm. Reverence, respect, and affection. So I think it really is a moral issue. And I think, there are certain figures, like the new Archbishop of Washington, I think, is going to use his cathedral as a bully pulpit, and he's going to have a good, receptive listener in the new president who's going to be there in the cathedral. I mean, this is what Joe Biden is like, and others. I will say this week, I was buoyed up by two political figures that I listened to, and in some ways it's different as night and day, in other ways not. Joe Biden talking forcefully and surrounded by a cabinet that is remarkable, and the other was the senator from Utah, Mitt Romney, who spoke in eloquent terms about healing and reconciliation and moving forward. The other thing, every once in a while, I find myself, and you're going to laugh yourself right out of that chair, Darrell Brown, when I say this. Whenever I really feel despondent, I go back, I Google the picture, and the picture is Michelle Obama W. Do you remember at the dedication of the museum?
Two of them.
The Black, the Museum of Black History
in Washington. Yeah.
And W is standing in front of her with this really wonderfully warm smile on his face, and she's got her arm around his shoulders.
Yeah.
And I look at it and I say, when I get discouraged about whether or not we can pull this off, pull what off? The American ideal. I look at that and I say, this guy from West Texas and this really refined, extraordinary Black woman from the South Side of Chicago, they have genuine reverence, respect, and affection for one another. And that's, I think, I want to go back to this, Darrell. We've talked about it. It's when you have a relationship and a friendship with someone who is as different as you could imagine when you walk into the room and see that person for the first time. Once you have a relationship or friendship with that person, that's when you can begin. And I said this to you just the other day. You can begin to accept the other person as real and as a wisdom figure that you can learn from. And that, I think, is where it all begins. It's a moral conversion that you get to that point. I don't know if that helps at all.
Well, I love that idea about there are wisdom figures who appear in your life if you are present enough to realize who they are and when they're there.
It's a moment of you give up control of it. And that's an important thing.
Yeah.
And you allow the reality of the moment and the strength of the other person to just come at you.
Yeah.
And then you say, geez, I want to spend more. This is another thing. Do you want to spend more time with this person?
Right.
That's the question. And you say, I can't live without the thought of having time with this person.
Because they are opening something up inside of you.
Liberating. It's a liberating moment.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes.
And so, Darrell, I say to you, whenever you're discouraged, just Google Michelle Obama W.
And W.
And you get this picture and you say, there is in the American soul goodness. And I also remember this country that can be so divided is also the same country that could be so generous of heart as to conceive of the Marshall Plan, where enemies are treated with what? Reverence, respect, and affection, and they build up the human family together. This is part of who we are. The other part is dark. 401 years ago, and 1863, and then the mid-60s, 1960s. We like to think we've come a long way. We have, but at the same time, we really have
there's a long way
that's done, and there's a lot before us. Darrell, thanks for the conversation.
Well, I really want to thank you for all you've done, for the leadership that you've shown, and for the legacy that you have.
Darrell, my friend, I do nothing. I'm a cheerleader, and I listen to what I hear, and I try and point the finger of approval at those who do good. That's it. All right. Thank you, my friend.
Well,
Laurel, nice to meet you virtually.
nice to meet you. And it's been an honor to be with you today. And
I'll send you the check.
I would I would argue that you do a lot and you do it well. And you're an example of compassionate leadership. And one of my colleagues at Cornell, Christina Workman, who's an academic, she's part of something called the Compassion Lab. It studies compassion and the ROI of compassion. And her definition of compassion is my favorite. It's the heart's response to suffering. And you are certainly a model of that, Father McShane. And I am so honored to meet you. And I hope I will get to speak to you in the new year again about things that you've talked about today. You've given us all a lot of hope and a lot of wisdom. And it was an honor to meet you and listen to you and your friend Daryl speak today. So thank you very much.
You're very kind. Give my best to Sag Harbor.
Thanks for listening to the Compassionate Leaders podcast. You can learn more about us at compassionateleaderscircle.com. Please join us each week as we shine a light on compassionate leaders making a positive impact on their communities and the world.